The moment I saw her reflection in his laptop screen, wearing the blue striped shirt I had ironed for him just 3 days earlier, I knew my world had just shattered into a million pieces. But what Henry didn't know was that I had already started collecting every single fragment, ready to cut him with them. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, watching this stranger move casually through what looked like a hotel room, her dark hair cascading over the collar of my husband's shirt. The shirt I had bought him for our anniversary. The shirt that still carried the scent of my perfume from when I hugged him goodbye at the airport. "Barbara, are you listening?" Henry's voice cut through my shock, his face filling the laptop screen with that practiced smile I now realized I hadn't seen genuinely in months. Behind him, the woman, young, beautiful, completely at ease, disappeared into what I assumed was a bathroom. "I'm listening," I whispered, my voice steady despite the hurricane building in my chest. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of believing in us, in him, in the life we'd built together. All of it crumbling in the space of 30 seconds. "The conference is running late tonight, so I might not be able to call tomorrow," he continued, adjusting his position slightly. I caught a glimpse of rumpled sheets in the background, a second wine glass on the nightstand. The evidence was everywhere, and he didn't even have the decency to hide it properly. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg for explanations or throw myself at his mercy like some broken, desperate wife. No. I was going to do something else entirely. Something that would make him understand exactly what it felt like to have your entire existence ripped away without warning. "Have a good night, honey," I said, my voice sweet as poisoned honey. "I love you. Love you too, Barb. See you when I get back." The screen went black, and in the reflection of the laptop, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and for the first time in 23 years, completely free. Henry had no idea that the woman he'd just lied to had spent the last 15 years as a forensic accountant, specializing in uncovering financial fraud. He had no idea that she had access to every single one of their accounts, every investment, every hidden asset he thought he'd been so clever about. And he certainly had no idea that she had been quietly documenting his suspicious behavior for the past 6 months, following her instincts even when she tried to convince herself she was being paranoid. As I closed the laptop, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Cold, calculating purpose. Henry wanted to play games? Fine. But he was about to learn that he'd been playing with the wrong woman all along. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. 3 days earlier I had been the perfect wife. The kind of woman who woke up at 5 a.m. to make sure Henry's coffee was ready exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in the navy mug his mother had given us for our first Christmas. I had pressed his shirts with military precision, packed his suitcase with the meticulous care of someone who genuinely believed her husband deserved the very best. "You sure you have everything?" I had asked, running my fingers along the zipper of his leather garment bag. The same bag I had bought him when he got promoted to senior partner at his law firm. Back when I thought his success was our success. "You worry too much, Barb," he had said, kissing my forehead in that distracted way that had become his default over the past year. "It's just Chicago. 3 days in and out." I had helped him load his car, waved from our front porch as he backed out of our circular driveway, and spent the rest of that Tuesday cleaning our house from top to bottom. Because that's what I did. That's who I was. The wife who kept everything perfect, everything in its place, everything exactly as it should be. Our home on Thornton Drive was a testament to our success. Or what I had thought was our success. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a kitchen that had been featured in Better Homes and Gardens 2 years ago. I had chosen every paint color, every piece of furniture, every carefully placed accent piece. It was my sanctuary, my pride and joy. But as I walked through those perfectly appointed rooms now 24 hours after my world had collapsed, they felt like a museum. A beautiful, empty museum dedicated to a life that had apparently been a complete lie. I stood in our bedroom, Henry's and mine, staring at the California king bed with its crisp white linens and carefully arranged throw pillows. How many nights had he lain next to me planning his escapes? How many mornings had he kissed me goodbye while already thinking about her? The woman in his shirt. Young, probably late 20s, with the kind of effortless beauty that doesn't need makeup or fancy clothes to turn heads. Everything I had been once, before 23 years of marriage, had settled into my hips and carved lines around my eyes. But as I caught my reflection in our bedroom mirror, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the shattered, pathetic creature I had expected to become. God, I looked focused, determined, like a woman who had just been handed the keys to her own prison and was finally ready to walk free. That's when I heard my phone buzz with a text message. Missing you already. Can't wait to get home and show you how much. Your loving husband. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, missing you too. The house feels so empty without you. Hurry home. The lie came so easily it shocked me. But then again, if Henry could lie for months, maybe years, then I could certainly manage a few text messages. I had work to do. My office was located in the converted third bedroom, overlooking our carefully manicured backyard. For 15 years I had built my reputation on being thorough, methodical, and absolutely relentless when it came to following paper trails. I had helped attorneys uncover millions in hidden assets, tracked down fraudulent transactions that spanned multiple countries, and built cases that put white-collar criminals behind bars. But I had never investigated my own husband. I started with the obvious: our joint accounts, credit card statements, phone records. Henry was smart, but he wasn't smart enough to hide everything from someone who did this for a living. Within 2 hours I had constructed a timeline that made my stomach turn. The business trips had started 18 months ago. Sudden overnight conferences, last-minute client meetings in cities I had never heard him mention before. Always paid for by the firm, always with perfectly reasonable explanations. But when I cross-referenced his credit card charges with his supposed itineraries, the picture became crystal clear. Expensive dinners for two in cities where he claimed to be in meetings all day. Hotel room service charges that were triple what one person would order. Purchases at women's clothing stores, jewelry boutiques, lingerie shops. All of it carefully spaced out, never quite enough to raise suspicions individually, but together forming an undeniable pattern. Then I found the burner phone. It was hidden in his office closet, tucked inside an old briefcase he never used anymore. A cheap flip phone with a single number programmed into it, labeled simply as BD. I photographed everything. The phone, the purchase receipt I found crumpled in his desk drawer, the call log showing dozens of conversations over the past 8 months. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it and went to make myself a cup of tea. My hands weren't shaking anymore. As I sat at our kitchen island, sipping Earl Grey from the china set my mother had given us as a wedding gift, I began to form a plan. It started as just a vague idea, a whisper of possibility in the back of my mind. But as the hours passed and I delved deeper into Henry's deception, that whisper grew into a roar. He thought he was so clever. He thought he had married some naive, dependent little housewife who would fall apart at the first sign of trouble. He had no idea that the woman he had been betraying was the same woman who had helped the FBI track down an embezzlement scheme that spanned 3 continents. He didn't know that she had once spent 6 months painstakingly reconstructing financial records that had been deliberately destroyed, or that she had a network of contacts in banking, investigation, and law enforcement who owed her significant favors. Most importantly, he had no idea that everything he owned, our house, our investments, our carefully accumulated wealth, was about to become a weapon in his own destruction. By the time Thursday evening rolled around, I had enough evidence to bury Henry in any divorce court in the country. But as I stared at the mountain of documents spread across my desk, I realized that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. A divorce would give me half of everything, sure. But it would also give him half, and it would let him walk away to start fresh with his little girlfriend. He would be bruised, financially damaged, but ultimately free to build a new life with the woman who had stolen mine. That wasn't justice. That was just business. No, what Henry deserved was something much more personal. Much more complete. He needed to understand what it felt like to have everything you believed in ripped away without warning. He needed to experience the same devastating shock, the same crushing realization that his entire life had been built on lies. And I was going to give him exactly that. Friday morning I drove to downtown Portland to visit an old friend. Virginia Williams ran a private investigation firm that specialized in what she called domestic discretion, helping wealthy women document their husbands' infidelities with the kind of ironclad evidence that held up in court. Barbara, she said, embracing me in the lobby of her sleek office building. It's been too long. Though I have a feeling this isn't a social call. Virginia and I had worked together on several cases over the years. She was the one who did the field work while I handled the financial forensics. We made a good team, and more importantly, I trusted her completely. I need your help, I said simply. And I need it to be completely off the books. An hour later, I had hired Virginia to conduct full surveillance on Henry during his next business trip, which was scheduled for the following week. I also retained her partner, a former federal marshal named Garcia, to do a complete background check on anyone Henry had been in contact with over the past year. You know, Virginia said as I signed the contracts, in 30 years of doing this work, I've never had a client who seemed so composed. Most women are falling apart by the time they get to me. Most women aren't forensic accountants, I replied. She laughed, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Just promise me you're not planning anything dangerous. I've seen too many smart women make stupid decisions when they're angry. I'm not angry, I said, and realized it was true. The white-hot rage from that first night had crystallized into something much colder, much more focused. I'm methodical. That afternoon I made 3 more stops. First, to my attorney's office, where I quietly updated my will and established a trust that would protect my personal assets in case of divorce. Second, to my bank, where I opened a new account in my maiden name and transferred just enough money to give me complete financial independence. Third, to a storage facility across town, where I rented a climate-controlled unit under the name of my mother's maiden name. By the time Henry called that evening to check in, I was ready. "How's Chicago?" I asked, settling into bed with a cup of tea and a book I wasn't actually reading. "Boring as hell," he said, and I could hear the practiced exhaustion in his voice. "The client is being difficult, and these depositions are running way longer than expected. I might have to stay an extra day." "That's fine, honey," I said. "Take all the time you need. I'm just here missing you. I miss you too, Barb. More than you know." The conviction in his voice was almost impressive. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed every word. "Henry," I said just before he hung up. "Yeah. I love you. No matter what happens, I want you to know that everything I do because I love you." There was a pause. That's sweet, Barb. I love you too." After he hung up, I sat in our bed for a long time, staring at the framed photographs on my nightstand. Our wedding day. I was 25, radiant in my grandmother's lace dress, absolutely certain that Henry and I would grow old together. Our 5th anniversary trip to Italy, both of us tan and laughing in front of the Colosseum. The photo from last Christmas taken just 8 months ago, where we looked like the perfect couple living the perfect life. In every single picture my smile was genuine. In every single picture I looked like a woman who was completely, utterly in love with her husband. Looking at those photos now, I felt something that surprised me. Not sadness, not anger, but a strange kind of gratitude. Because that woman, the trusting, naive woman who had believed in fairy tales and happy endings, was gone now. And in her place was someone much stronger, much smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Henry had created his own worst enemy, and he didn't even know it yet. Saturday morning brought the first piece of truly devastating news. Garcia called me at 7 a.m. with his preliminary findings. "Her name is Beverly Donovan," he said without preamble. 28 years old, junior associate at Hartley & Associates downtown. "That's the law firm your husband's been doing consulting work with." I gripped the phone tighter. "How long?" "Based on what I can find, they've been involved for at least 14 months. She started at the firm 18 months ago, and the first unusual charges on your husband's credit cards started about 4 weeks after that. 14 months. Over a year of lies, of deception, of Henry coming home to me every night after spending his days with her. I had been cooking his favorite meals, doing his laundry, planning our future while he was busy planning a completely different life with someone else. There's more, Garcia continued. She's pregnant. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the kitchen counter. For a moment the world went completely silent. Then I picked up the phone with steady hands. How far along? About 3 months from what I can tell. She's been to several medical appointments, and your husband has been paying for them through a separate credit card account I found. 3 months pregnant. Which meant Henry had known for at least a month, probably longer. And he had said nothing. Had continued to lie to me, continued to share our bed, continued to plan business trips, while his mistress was carrying his child. "Send me everything," I said. "Every detail, every photograph, every receipt. I want it all." "Barbara," Garcia said carefully, "I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've seen what this kind of betrayal can do to people. Maybe you should take some time to process this before." "Send me everything," I repeated. "Today." After I hung up, I sat in my perfect kitchen in my perfect house and laughed. Actually laughed until tears ran down my face. Because the situation had just become so much worse than I had imagined that it was almost absurd. Henry wasn't just having an affair. He was starting a completely new family while pretending everything was normal with me. He was living two entirely separate lives, and he was apparently convinced that he was smart enough to manage both indefinitely. But what he didn't understand was that he had just given me the perfect weapon to destroy him. I spent the rest of Saturday in my office, piecing together the full scope of Henry's deception. The financial evidence was damning enough. The secret credit cards, the cash withdrawals, the expensive gifts, the medical payments. But when I combined that with the surveillance photos Virginia had already started taking, the timeline Garcia had constructed, and the phone records I had obtained, the picture became crystal clear. Henry Smith, respected attorney and pillar of the community, was a liar, a cheat, and a fraud. He was stealing from our joint accounts to support his pregnant mistress while lying to his wife of 23 years about business trips that were actually romantic getaways. But more than that, he was a coward. Because instead of having the decency to end our marriage before starting a new relationship, he had chosen to string me along, probably hoping he could figure out some way to have both lives simultaneously. The man I had loved, trusted, and built my entire adult life around was a stranger. And that stranger had made the biggest mistake of his life when he underestimated exactly what kind of woman he had married. By Sunday evening I had a plan. It was comprehensive, devastating, and absolutely airtight. But most importantly, it would give Henry exactly what he had given me: the complete destruction of everything he thought he could count on. He wanted to live a double life. Fine. But he was about to learn that actions have consequences, and some betrayals come with a price that can never be paid. Monday morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Then I drove to Beverly Donovan's apartment complex. It was a nice place, not luxurious but comfortable and modern. The kind of place a young attorney could afford, especially if she had a wealthy older man helping with the rent. I parked across the street and waited. She emerged at 8:30 a.m., looking exactly like she had in the surveillance photos Garcia had sent me. Tall, elegant, with the kind of natural beauty that photographers dream about. She was wearing a loose-fitting dress that cleverly disguised her pregnancy, and she moved with the confident grace of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world. I watched her drive away in a silver Honda that was probably 2 years old, practical but well-maintained. Then I got out of my car and walked to her mailbox. Virginia had taught me this trick years ago. If you want to know someone's secrets, start with their mail. Not to steal it, that would be a federal crime, but to see what kind of life they're living. Medical bills, credit card statements, subscription services, utility payments. Mail tells a story that social media profiles never will. Beverly Donovan was living beyond her means. That much was clear from the pile of credit card statements and past due notices visible through the slots in her mailbox. She was also receiving mail from a fertility clinic downtown, confirming what Garcia had already discovered. But the piece that caught my attention was a letter from a high-end real estate agency. The kind of place that handled million-dollar properties, not apartments for junior associates. She was house hunting. With my husband's money, no doubt. I drove home and called Virginia. "I need you to find out everything you can about Beverly Donovan's future plans," I said. "Real estate searches, job applications, any major purchases she might be considering. I think Henry is planning to leave me, and I want to know exactly what kind of life he thinks he's going to have." "Barbara," Virginia said carefully, "what are you planning to do with all this information?" "I'm going to make sure that the life he thinks he's building with her becomes impossible," I said. Completely, utterly impossible. That afternoon I made a series of phone calls that would have surprised Henry if he had known about them. Because while he had been living his double life, I had been building my own network of contacts and relationships that had nothing to do with him. The first call was to Amanda Foster, a reporter at the Portland Tribune who specialized in legal affairs and professional misconduct. Amanda and I had worked together on a story about judicial corruption 2 years earlier, and she owed me a significant favor. I might have a story for you, I said. A prominent local attorney who's been using client funds to support his pregnant mistress while lying to his wife about business trips. Interested? Very, Amanda said. How solid is your evidence? Rock solid. Financial records, photographs, witness statements, the works. When do you want to move on this? Soon, I said. I'll let you know. The second call was to Martin Garcia at the Oregon State Bar Association. Martin and I had dated briefly in college and we had remained friendly over the years. He was now in charge of investigating ethical violations by practicing attorneys. Barbara, good to hear from you, Martin said. What can I do for you? I need to report a potential ethics violation, I said. An attorney who may be misusing client funds for personal expenses. How would I go about filing a formal complaint? Depends on the nature of the violation. Why don't you send me what you have and I'll take a look? I'll get that to you this week, I said. The third call was the most important. I dialed the main number for Hartley and Associates and asked to speak with the managing partner. This is Barbara Smith, I said when Jonathan Hartley came on the line. My husband Henry has been doing consulting work with your firm. I was hoping we could meet to discuss some concerns I have about potential conflicts of interest. There was a long pause. Mrs. Smith, I'm not sure what you mean by conflicts of interest. I think it would be better if we discussed this in person, I said. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? Another pause, longer this time. I can see you at 3 o'clock. Perfect. That evening Henry called as usual. How was your day, sweetheart? He asked, and I could hear traffic in the background. He was probably driving home from Beverly's apartment. Quiet, I said. I've been thinking about us a lot lately. About our future. Our future. I know we've talked about this before, but I've been wondering if maybe it's time for us to think about having children. I know we're not young anymore, but with modern medicine. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Barb, he finally said, we've been through this. We decided years ago that we were happy just being us. I know what we decided, I said. But people change. Priorities change. I've been feeling lately like something is missing from our life. Let's talk about this when I get home, okay? This isn't really a phone conversation. Of course, I said. When do you think you'll be back? Tomorrow night, probably around 8. I'll make your favorite dinner, I said. We can talk about everything then. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of our living room and allowed myself one moment of genuine sadness. Not for the loss of my marriage, that had been dead for over a year, I now realized, but for the woman I used to be. The woman who had wanted children with this man, who had trusted him with her heart, her future, her entire life. That woman deserved to be mourned. But she also deserved to be avenged. And tomorrow the process would begin. Tuesday at 3 p.m., I walked into the offices of Hartley and Associates wearing my best navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that contained copies of every piece of evidence I had gathered. The reception area was all glass and chrome, designed to impress clients with the firm's success and sophistication. Jonathan Hartley met me personally, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this meeting. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s. With silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that spoke of decades of success in corporate law. Mrs. Smith, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming in. Why don't we talk in my office? His office was exactly what I had expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, shelves lined with legal texts and awards, a massive desk that had probably cost more than most people's cars. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, then took his own seat and folded his hands. Now then, he said, what can I do for you? I opened my briefcase and placed a single photograph on his desk. It showed Henry and Beverly coming out of a hotel in Seattle, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing. The timestamp showed it was taken during one of his supposed business trips. Jonathan Hartley's face went very pale. Mr. Hartley, I said, I'm here because I believe your firm has been inadvertently facilitating an unethical relationship between my husband and one of your employees. I'm hoping we can resolve this matter quietly, without involving the State Bar Association or the press. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at me. Mrs. Smith, I want you to know that this firm has strict policies about relationships between consultants and employees. I'm sure you do, I interrupted. The question is whether those policies were followed in this case. Because based on my investigation, it appears that my husband has been billing your firm for work he wasn't actually doing, while using those payments to finance his relationship with Ms. Donovan. I placed 3 more items on his desk: copies of Henry's billing statements to the firm, credit card receipts showing expensive gifts and hotel rooms during times when he was supposedly working, and a timeline that showed the correlation between his consulting payments and his personal expenses. This is extremely serious, Hartley said, studying the documents. If what you're suggesting is true. It's not a suggestion, I said. It's fact. The question is what you intend to do about it. He was quiet for a long time, examining each piece of evidence with the thoroughness of an experienced attorney. Finally he looked up at me. What do you want, Mrs. Smith? I want my husband's consulting relationship with this firm terminated immediately, I said. I want Ms. Donovan transferred to another department where she won't have any contact with outside consultants. And I want a formal investigation into whether any client funds were misused in this situation. And if we agree to these terms? Then this matter stays between us, I said. No press, no bar association complaints, no public embarrassment for anyone involved. And if we don't agree? I stood up and began putting the documents back in my briefcase. Then tomorrow morning, Amanda Foster at the Tribune will be running a story about how Hartley and Associates facilitated an extramarital affair between a married consultant and a pregnant employee, possibly using client funds. The Oregon State Bar will receive a formal complaint about Henry's billing practices. And I'll be filing a civil lawsuit against both the firm and my husband for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Jonathan Hartley was a smart man. He understood exactly what I was offering him. A way to end this situation cleanly with minimal damage to his firm's reputation. I'll need some time to investigate these claims, he said. Of course, I said. But I'll need an answer by Friday. My husband returns from his current business trip tomorrow evening, and I plan to have this matter resolved before he discovers that his entire life is about to change. I left my business card on his desk and walked out, knowing that I had just fired the first shot in a war that Henry didn't even know had started. Wednesday evening, I prepared Henry's favorite dinner with the same meticulous care I had shown for 23 years. Grilled salmon with lemon butter, roasted asparagus, wild rice pilaf, and a bottle of the Pinot Noir we had been saving for a special occasion. The table was set with our wedding china, candles flickered in our crystal holders, and soft jazz played from the sound system Henry had installed last year. To any observer, it would have looked like a romantic dinner for a couple celebrating their reunion after a business trip. But I wasn't celebrating. I was conducting a funeral for my marriage and I wanted it to be perfect. Henry arrived at 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes earlier than he had promised. He came through the door with his usual rush of energy, calling out my name as he dropped his garment bag and laptop case in the foyer. Something smells incredible, he said, finding me in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on our plates. He kissed my cheek and I caught the faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine clinging to his shirt. Welcome home, I said, smiling up at him. How was Chicago? Exhausting, he said, loosening his tie. But productive. We finally got the Brown case resolved, so the client is happy. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost admired his skill. If I hadn't known better, if I hadn't seen the photographs of him and Beverly at Pike Place Market in Seattle just yesterday, I would have believed every word. I'm so glad, I said. Why don't you go wash up while I finish getting dinner ready? 20 minutes later we were seated across from each other at our dining room table, the soft candlelight casting shadows across his face as he told me elaborate stories about meetings that had never happened and clients he had never met. So, he said, cutting into his salmon, you mentioned something on the phone about children. That was unexpected. Was it? I said, taking a sip of wine. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about what I want from life. About what would make me truly happy. I thought you were happy, he said, and for the first time, I heard a note of genuine concern in his voice. Are you not happy, Barb? I set down my wine glass and looked directly at him. 23 years of marriage and I was about to end it all with a single question. Henry, I said, If you could have any life you wanted with no consequences and no limitations, what would it look like? He paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. That's a strange question. Humor me, I said. Would you still choose the life we have now? This house, this marriage, this routine we've built together. Of course I would, he said, but his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. Why would you even ask something like that? Because I've been wondering lately if maybe we've both been settling, I said. If maybe we've been so comfortable with what we have that we haven't been honest about what we actually want. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Henry put down his fork and reached across the table to take my hand. Barbara, you're scaring me a little bit, he said. Where is all this coming from? This was it. The moment of truth. I could still pull back, pretend this conversation had never happened, go back to being the perfect wife who never asked difficult questions. Instead, I pulled my hand free and reached for my phone. I had an interesting conversation with Jonathan Hartley yesterday, I said, scrolling through my photos until I found the one I wanted. He showed me some pictures that I thought you might find interesting. I placed the phone on the table between us, displaying the photograph of Henry and Beverly leaving the hotel in Seattle. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment I was genuinely concerned he might faint. Barbara. He began. Don't, I said, holding up my hand. Don't insult my intelligence by trying to explain this away. I know about Beverly. I know about the pregnancy. I know about the apartment you've been paying for, the medical bills, the jewelry, all of it. He stared at the photograph for what felt like an eternity, then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Does it matter? I said. The question is, what happens now? What followed was perhaps the most surreal conversation of my entire life. Henry, faced with undeniable evidence of his betrayal, seemed to deflate like a punctured balloon. The confident, successful attorney I had been married to for over 2 decades was replaced by a man who looked lost, confused, and suddenly very old. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said, staring down at his hands. Beverly and I mean, when I started consulting for Hartley, she was assigned to assist with my cases. We spent a lot of time working together, talking about the law, about life. He's brilliant, Barbara. Really brilliant. I'm sure she is, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Tell me about the pregnancy. He winced as if I had struck him. She told me 2 months ago. It wasn't planned, neither of us expected. But you were happy about it, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he whispered. God help me, yes. When she told me, the first thing I felt was joy. Complete, overwhelming joy. And that's when you started looking at real estate. His head snapped up. How did you? I told you, Henry, I know everything. The question I need you to answer is this. Were you ever planning to tell me? Or were you just going to keep living this double life indefinitely? For a long time he didn't answer. The candles continued to flicker, the jazz continued to play, and the dinner I had spent hours preparing grew cold on our plates. I was going to tell you, he finally said. I didn't know how. We've been together for so long, Barbara. Our whole adult lives. I kept thinking maybe I could find a way to make this work without destroying everything we've built. What exactly did you think was going to happen? I asked. You were going to keep me as your wife while you played house with your pregnant girlfriend? You were going to split your time between 2 families and somehow convince yourself that was fair to anyone involved. I don't know, he said, and for the first time his voice broke. I don't know what I was thinking. I just knew that I loved her and I loved the idea of having a child with her, but I also couldn't bear the thought of losing you completely. Well, congratulations, I said, standing up and beginning to clear the table. You've managed to lose both of us. What do you mean? He asked, following me into the kitchen. I turned to face him, holding our wedding china plates in my hands. I mean that Beverly Donovan's career at Hartley and Associates ended yesterday afternoon. Along with your consulting contract. Henry's face went white. What are you talking about? I had a very productive meeting with Jonathan Hartley, I said, setting the plates in the sink with deliberate care. He was quite disturbed to learn that one of his consultants had been billing for work he wasn't doing while conducting an affair with one of his junior associates. Apparently, using company resources to facilitate extramarital relationships is against firm policy. You can't. Barbara, you can't do this. That's my career, my reputation. Your reputation? I laughed. a sound that was harsh and unfamiliar even to my own ears. Henry, your reputation died the moment you decided to start living a lie. I'm just making it public. What do you want? He asked, and I could see the panic building in his eyes. Money? The house. I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce. This isn't about the divorce, I said. This is about consequences. For 23 years I have been your wife, your partner, your biggest supporter. I have put your career first, your needs first, your happiness first. And in return you have made me into a fool. I walked past him into the living room and he followed like a lost dog. I can fix this, he said desperately. I'll end things with Beverly. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't destroy my career over this. End things with Beverly? I turned to stare at him. Henry, she's pregnant with your child. You can't just end things and pretend none of this happened. We can figure something out. I'll support the baby financially, but I don't have to be involved. I can choose my marriage over. Stop, I said, holding up my hand. Just stop talking. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about abandoning your pregnant girlfriend and your unborn child to save a marriage you've already destroyed. What kind of man does that make you? He stood in our living room, surrounded by 23 years of shared memories and joint decisions, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked completely lost. I don't know, he whispered. I don't know what kind of man I am anymore. Thursday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. I was sitting in my office, going through the final details of the financial arrangements I had been making when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Smith. The voice was young, female, and shaking with emotion. This is Beverly Donovan. I think we need to talk. I had been expecting this call, but it still sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Good morning, Ms. Donovan. What can I do for you? I need to see you, she said. In person. There are things about Henry, about your husband, that you need to know. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, neutral territory where neither of us would have the advantage of familiar surroundings. As I drove there, I found myself curious about what Beverly Donovan could possibly tell me that I didn't already know. I found her sitting in a corner booth, looking smaller and more fragile than she had in the surveillance photos. Pregnancy suited her, giving her skin a luminous quality that made her look even younger than her 28 years. But her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted her teacup. Thank you for coming, she said as I slid into the seat across from her. You said there were things I needed to know, I replied. I'm listening. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a difficult conversation. First, I want you to know that I didn't know about you. Not at first. When I started working with Henry, he told me he was separated. He said you were living separate lives but hadn't filed for divorce yet because of financial complications. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him, she said. He was everything I thought I wanted in a man. Successful, sophisticated, charming. When he told me he loved me, when he started talking about a future together, I thought I had found my happy ending. When did you find out the truth? 3 weeks ago, she said, and fresh tears started sliding down her cheeks. I got suspicious because he never wanted me to call him at home, never wanted to meet anywhere near your neighborhood. So I hired a private investigator. I couldn't help but laugh. You hired an investigator to investigate my husband while I was doing the same thing. I found out that you weren't separated at all, she continued. That you still shared a bed, still went to social events together, still acted like a happily married couple. And when I confronted Henry about it, what did he say? He said he was going to leave you. That he just needed time to figure out how to do it without destroying you financially. He said you were fragile. That you had never worked outside the home and wouldn't be able to take care of yourself if he left you suddenly. The condescension in that statement took my breath away. Henry had been painting me as some helpless, dependent creature to justify his deception, when in reality I was probably more financially sophisticated than he was. Ms. Donovan, I said carefully, why are you telling me this? Because yesterday after you met with Mr. Hartley, Henry called me, she said. He told me that you had found out about us, and that we needed to end our relationship immediately. He said he was going to choose his marriage over me and the baby. And how did you feel about that? Betrayed, she said simply. Completely and utterly betrayed. I realized that I had been just as much of a fool as you were. Henry never intended to leave you for me. I was just convenient. A young woman who was impressed by his success and grateful for his attention. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, which she placed on the table between us. What's this? I asked. Copies of text messages, emails, voicemails, she said. Everything Henry sent me over the past 14 months. Including some very explicit promises about the life we were going to build together and some very unflattering things he said about you. I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Why would you give me this? Because, she said, meeting my eyes for the first time since I had sat down, Henry Smith is a liar and a coward, and I think it's time he faced the consequences of his actions. I can't undo the damage I've done to your marriage, but maybe I can help you make sure he doesn't get to just walk away from this without any real consequences. What about you? I asked. What about the baby? I'm 3 months pregnant with the child of a man who just told me I was a mistake he needs to fix, she said. I don't have many options left. But I do have evidence that could destroy his reputation and his career, and I think that's worth something. I picked up the envelope and tucked it into my purse. Ms. Donovan, I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened. You were lied to just as much as I was. Thank you, she whispered. That means more to me than you know. As I drove home, I realized that my plan had just become much more powerful than I had originally intended. I didn't just have evidence of Henry's financial improprieties and professional misconduct. I now had a co-conspirator who was just as motivated as I was to see him pay for his deceptions. Henry had created 2 enemies when he thought he was managing 2 relationships. And now those enemies were working together. That evening, Henry came home to find me exactly where he had left me the night before. Sitting at our kitchen island, calmly reading a book and sipping a cup of tea. But everything had changed and somehow he seemed to sense it the moment he walked through the door. How was your day? He asked cautiously. Interesting, I said, not looking up from my book. I had coffee with Beverly Donovan this morning. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might collapse. Barbara, I can explain. Can you? I said, finally looking up at him. Can you explain why you told her I was a fragile, dependent housewife who had never worked outside the home? Can you explain why you promised to marry her while you were still married to me? Can you explain why you told her you loved her more than you had ever loved anyone in your life? He sank into the chair across from me, looking like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. She gave you the messages, he said quietly. All of them, I confirmed. 14 months' worth of promises you never intended to keep and lies you never intended to confess. It's quite a collection, Henry. Really illuminating. What are you going to do? I closed my book and looked at him directly. I'm going to ask you one question and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. In all of this, the lying, the cheating, the deception, the promises to Beverly, the disrespect toward me, was there ever a single moment when you considered the possibility that your actions might have consequences? He stared at me for a long time before answering. I thought I was smart enough to manage it all. You thought you were smart enough to manage 2 women's entire lives without either of us ever figuring out what was really happening? Yes, he whispered. Well, I said, standing up and walking to the window, you were wrong. And now you're going to discover exactly what happens when the women you've been manipulating decide to stop playing your game. Barbara, please. Tomorrow morning, I said, cutting him off, you're going to receive a call from Martin Garcia at the State Bar Association. He's going to inform you that a formal complaint has been filed regarding your billing practices and professional conduct. The complaint includes evidence that you've been falsifying time records and using client payments for personal expenses. Henry's face went ashen. You can't do this. You're my wife. Tomorrow afternoon, I continued, Amanda Foster from the Tribune is going to publish a story about professional misconduct at Hartley and Associates. It won't mention you by name initially, but anyone in the legal community will be able to figure out who she's talking about. Barbara, please, my career. Tomorrow evening, I said, turning to face him, I'm filing for divorce. I'm asking for everything, Henry. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, alimony, and damages for emotional distress. And before you start thinking about fighting me, you should know that Beverly is prepared to testify about your promises to leave me and marry her, which establishes clear intent to defraud. He slumped forward in his chair, holding his head in his hands. What about forgiveness? What about 23 years of marriage? Doesn't that mean anything to you? What about loyalty? I countered. What about the vows you made to me? What about the 23 years I spent building a life with someone who was apparently just using me as a placeholder while he figured out what he really wanted? I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said. You hurt me every single day for 14 months. Every time you lied about where you were going, every time you came home and pretended to love me while you were planning a future with someone else. Every time you made me feel like I was losing my mind for noticing that something was wrong. You didn't just cheat on me, Henry. You made me doubt my own perceptions of reality. So this is revenge? No, I said. This is consequences. Revenge would be emotional and messy and ultimately self-destructive. This is simply the natural result of the choices you made. You decided to live a lie, and now that lie is collapsing around you. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a set of car keys that weren't mine. These belong to Beverly, I said, placing them on the table in front of him. She asked me to give them to you. Apparently, you've been making the payments on her Honda. Where is she going? He asked. She's moving back to Sacramento to live with her sister while she figures out her next steps. She wanted me to tell you not to contact her again. Ever. What about the baby? What about the baby, Henry? You made it clear to her that you were choosing me over her and your child. So she's choosing to raise your child without you. Congratulations, you've managed to abandon your family before it was even born. He stared at the keys for a long time, then looked up at me with eyes that were full of tears. I know you hate me now, he said. But I want you to know that I did love you. I do love you. What happened with Beverly doesn't change that. You're right, I said. It doesn't change it. It reveals it. Because love isn't just a feeling, Henry. It's a choice you make every single day. It's choosing to be honest even when the truth is difficult. It's choosing to be faithful even when temptation presents itself. It's choosing to protect the person you've committed your life to even when it means sacrificing something you want. I walked to the doorway, then turned back to look at him one more time. For 14 months, you chose Beverly over me every single day. You chose to lie to me, to deceive me, to risk everything we had built together for the sake of a relationship with a woman who is young enough to be our daughter. You chose to make promises to her that you never intended to keep. And you chose to keep me in a marriage that was already over without giving me the chance to make my own decisions about my life. Barbara. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, I said. Tomorrow I want you out of this house. You can stay wherever you want, but you can't stay here. This is my home now, and you are no longer welcome in it. As I walked upstairs, leaving Henry alone in the kitchen with the keys to his pregnant ex-girlfriend's car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. For the first time in 14 months, I knew exactly where I stood, exactly what was true, and exactly what I needed to do next. Henry had spent over a year living in a fantasy where he could have everything he wanted without facing any consequences. Tomorrow he was going to wake up in the real world. And the real world, as he was about to discover, was far less forgiving than his fantasy had been. Friday morning arrived like the dawn of a new era. I woke up in the guest bedroom at 6 a.m., feeling more rested than I had in months. For the first time since that devastating video call, I knew exactly what my future held, and while it wasn't the future I had planned, it was entirely my own. Henry was already gone when I came downstairs. His car was missing from the garage and he had left a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to get breakfast. We need to talk when I get back. H. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. We were past the point of talking. The first call came at 8:30 a.m. Martin Garcia from the State Bar Association, right on schedule. Mrs. Smith? I've reviewed the materials you sent me regarding your husband's billing practices. I'm calling to inform you that we'll be opening a formal investigation into potential ethical violations. Thank you, Martin, I said. I appreciate your thoroughness. Barbara, he said, his tone shifting from official to personal, I have to ask, are you sure you want to pursue this? Once this investigation begins, there's no going back. Henry's career could be permanently damaged. I'm sure, I said without hesitation. The second call came at 10:15 a.m. Amanda Foster from the Tribune. Barbara, my editor has approved the story. It'll run in tomorrow's edition, both print and online. I'm not using names in the initial piece, but I am describing the situation in enough detail that anyone in the legal community will be able to connect the dots. Perfect, I said. There's something else, Amanda continued. After I started making calls about this story, I received tips about 2 other similar situations involving attorneys in the city. Apparently, your husband's behavior isn't as unique as we thought. That information hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying this has happened before? I'm saying that the legal community is smaller than you might think, and when one person behaves unethically, others usually know about it. The fact that multiple sources came forward after just a few preliminary inquiries suggests that Henry's reputation might not be as solid as you believed. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process this new revelation. Had Henry cheated before? Had there been other women, other lies, other betrayals that I had been too trusting to see? It didn't matter now. Whatever he had done in the past, whatever pattern of behavior this represented, it was ending today. At 11:30 a.m. my phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Henry's number. "Barbara, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Garcia from the state bar called me. How could you do this? How could you file a complaint against me?" "The same way you could lie to me for 14 months, I replied. "Easily. This will destroy my career. Is that really what you want? To take away everything I've worked for my entire adult life?" "Henry," I said, "you took away everything I worked for my entire adult life when you decided to start a secret relationship with another woman. The only difference is that I built my life around loving you, while you built your career around lying to clients. At least my loss is honest." "I can fix this," he said desperately. "I can make this right. Please just call off the investigation. We can work through this together." "There is no together anymore," I said. "You made sure of that when you chose Beverly over me every single day for over a year." "I never chose her over you." "Really?" I said. "Then why did you promise to marry her? Why did you tell her you loved her more than you'd ever loved anyone? Why did you start shopping for houses with her while you were still sharing a bed with me?" Silence. "Henry," I said, "in a few hours you're going to receive divorce papers. I suggest you hire a very good attorney because I intend to fight for everything. And given what I know about your financial improprieties and professional misconduct, I think I'm going to win." I hung up before he could respond. The third call of the day came at 2 p.m. Jonathan Hartley from the law firm. "Mrs. Smith, I wanted to inform you personally that we've completed our internal investigation into the matter we discussed. Henry's consulting contract has been terminated, and Ms. Donovan has been placed on administrative leave pending our review of her involvement in the situation. Thank you for letting me know." "There's something else," he said. "During our investigation, we discovered some irregularities in Henry's billing that go back several years. We'll be conducting a full audit of all his work with the firm." "Several years?" I repeated. "I'm afraid so. It appears that the situation with Ms. Donovan may have been just the most recent in a pattern of questionable behavior." After that call, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on our back patio, looking out over the garden I had spent years cultivating. Every flower, every tree, every carefully planned landscape feature represented hours of my time, my creativity, my love for the home Henry and I had built together. Now it was just my home. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, that felt like a relief rather than a loss. At 4 p.m. Henry's car pulled into our driveway. I watched through the window as he sat behind the wheel for several minutes, as if gathering the courage to come inside. When he finally walked through the front door, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single day. "The divorce papers," he said, holding up a thick manila envelope. "I can't believe you actually did it. What did you expect?" I asked. "I expected the woman I married," he said. "The woman who loved me enough to work through problems instead of destroying me the first chance she got." I stared at him in amazement. "Henry, you didn't give me problems to work through. You gave me lies to uncover. You didn't give me a marriage to save. You gave me a deception to expose. I made mistakes." "You made choices," I corrected. "Deliberate, calculated choices to betray me, to deceive me, to build a life with another woman while pretending you were committed to me. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions." He sank into our living room couch, still holding the divorce papers. "What happens now?" "Now you face the consequences of your decisions," I said. "You find a place to live, you hire an attorney, you figure out how to rebuild your career from the ruins of your reputation. You become a father to the child you abandoned or you don't. But either way you do it without me. Barbara, he said, and his voice was thick with tears, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But is there any possibility that someday we might be able to be friends? That we might be able to salvage something from 23 years together? I considered his question seriously, looking at this man who had shared my bed, my dreams, my entire adult life. The man who had held me when my mother died, who had celebrated with me when I landed my first big client, who had danced with me at our friends' anniversary parties and talked about growing old together. That man had been real at least for a while. But he had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who was capable of breathtaking selfishness and casual cruelty. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday when the hurt isn't so fresh and the betrayal isn't so raw, we might be able to have a civil conversation. But friends? I don't think so, Henry. Friends don't lie to each other for 14 months. Friends don't make each other feel crazy for noticing that something is wrong. Friends don't abandon pregnant girlfriends to save marriages they've already destroyed. He nodded slowly as if he had expected that answer. I'll pack some things and stay at a hotel tonight, he said. I'll arrange to get the rest of my stuff when you're not here. That's probably best, I agreed. As he stood to leave, he turned back to me one more time. I really did love you, Barbara. I know you don't believe that anymore, but it's true. I know you did, I said. But love without respect, without honesty, without fidelity isn't really love at all. It's just sentiment. And sentiment isn't enough to build a life on. After he left, I walked through our house, my house, and began the process of reclaiming it. I took down the wedding photos, packed away the mementos of our life together, and started planning how I would redecorate the spaces that had been ours to make them fully mine. For the first time in 23 years, I was completely free to make my own choices, pursue my own dreams, build my own future. And while that freedom had come at a terrible price, I was finally ready to embrace it. Henry had given me the greatest gift possible, though he would never understand it. He had given me back myself. 6 weeks later, I stood in the courthouse lobby, waiting for my divorce hearing to begin. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed, largely because Henry's attorney had advised him not to contest my demands. With the state bar investigation ongoing and the Tribune's follow-up articles generating significant attention in the legal community, fighting me in court would have only created more public scrutiny he couldn't afford. Beverly Donovan was there too, sitting on a bench near the windows, her pregnancy now clearly visible beneath her simple black dress. We had become unlikely allies over the past month and a half, bonding over our shared experience of Henry's deception. She was testifying today about his promises to divorce me and marry her, which would help establish the emotional distress damages I was seeking. How are you feeling? I asked, sitting down beside her. Nervous, she admitted. But ready. I want this to be over. Have you heard from him at all? She shook her head. Not since the day you told him I was moving to Sacramento. He sent flowers on what would have been our anniversary, I said. No note, just flowers. I threw them away. Henry arrived precisely at the scheduled time, looking haggard and defeated. He had lost weight and his expensive suit seemed to hang on his frame. The confident, successful man I had married was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. His attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patterson, tried one last time to negotiate before we went into the courtroom. Mrs. Smith, she said, my client is prepared to offer you 60% of all assets, plus alimony for 10 years. In exchange, he's asking that you withdraw your cooperation with the state bar investigation. I didn't even need to consult with my own attorney. No. Mrs. Smith, please be reasonable. You're essentially asking for everything. I'm asking for what I'm legally entitled to under Oregon law, I said. Which is half of our community property, plus damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, plus alimony based on the lifestyle I became accustomed to during our marriage. The state bar investigation is a separate matter entirely. The hearing itself was mercifully brief. Henry had chosen not to contest the divorce, so it was mainly a matter of formalizing the asset division and establishing the alimony payments. But when Beverly took the stand to describe Henry's promises to her, the full scope of his deception became clear even to the judge. Mr. Smith promised to divorce his wife and marry me, she testified, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. He told me repeatedly that he loved me more than he had ever loved anyone, and that we were going to build a life together. He helped me look at houses, talked about our future children, and made detailed plans for our wedding. When I became pregnant, he initially expressed joy and talked about how excited he was to be a father. And when did these promises change? My attorney asked. When his wife discovered our relationship, Beverly said. Suddenly, he claimed he had never intended to leave her, that I had misunderstood his intentions, and that our relationship was a mistake that needed to be corrected. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at Henry with obvious disapproval. Mr. Smith, do you contest any of this testimony? Henry's attorney whispered something to him and he shook his head. No, Your Honor. Very well, the judge said. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. Smith engaged in a deliberate pattern of deception that caused significant emotional distress to both his wife and Ms. Donovan. Mrs. Smith, you are awarded 75% of all community property, alimony of $8,000 per month for 15 years, and $50,000 in damages for emotional distress. I felt a surge of satisfaction, but it wasn't the vindictive pleasure I had expected. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the satisfaction of justice served, of accounts finally balanced. After the hearing, Henry approached me in the hallway. I hope you're satisfied, he said, his voice bitter. Actually, I am, I replied. For the first time in over a year, I feel like the universe makes sense again. You've destroyed my life. No, Henry, I said. You destroyed your own life. I just refused to let you destroy mine in the process. He walked away without another word, and I realized that was probably the last conversation I would ever have with my former husband. Beverly and I left the courthouse together, walking out into a bright spring afternoon that felt full of possibilities. What will you do now? She asked as we reached our cars. I'm thinking about starting my own forensic accounting firm, I said. Specializing in cases like ours. Helping women who suspect their husbands of financial infidelity get the evidence they need. That sounds perfect, she said. You'd be helping a lot of people. What about you? My sister has offered to help with the baby, she said. And I'm thinking about going back to school. Maybe getting an MBA, starting fresh in a completely different field. We hugged goodbye, two women who had been enemies until we realized we were actually victims of the same man's selfishness. As I drove home to my house, which was now truly, legally, completely mine, I thought about the woman I had been 6 weeks ago. That woman had believed in happily ever after, in the power of love to overcome any obstacle, in the fundamental goodness of the man she had married. That woman was gone. But the woman who had replaced her was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more free. 1 year later, I sat in my new office, reviewing the financial records of a client whose husband had been hiding assets for 3 years. The business I had started with my divorce settlement had grown beyond my wildest expectations. It turned out there were many women like me, intelligent, successful women who had been systematically deceived by men they trusted completely. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the article about your business in Portland Monthly. Congratulations. You deserve every success. R. Beverly. She had finished her MBA and was now working for a consulting firm in San Francisco. Her daughter, Henry's daughter, was healthy and beautiful based on the photos she occasionally sent. Henry had never attempted to establish contact with either of them. I typed back, "Thank you. How are you both doing?" "Better than ever. Emma just took her first steps yesterday. I think you would like her. She's stubborn as hell and refuses to accept help from anyone." I smiled, recognizing the description of a little girl who was already showing signs of the strength she would need to navigate a world that hadn't always been kind to her mother. Another text arrived. "Have you heard anything about Henry lately?" I had, actually. Through the professional grapevine, I knew that the state bar had suspended his license for 2 years. The Tribune's investigation had uncovered a pattern of billing irregularities going back nearly a decade, and several other women had come forward with stories of inappropriate relationships. Henry was now working as a paralegal for a small firm in Vancouver, Washington, trying to rebuild his reputation one case at a time. "He's alive," I texted back. "That's about all I know." "That's more than I need to know," came her reply. "I hope he's learned something from all this." I doubted it. Men like Henry rarely learned from their mistakes because they rarely accepted responsibility for them. But that was no longer my problem. As the afternoon sun streamed through my office windows, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I had been a betrayed wife living in the ruins of a shattered marriage. Today, I was a successful business owner helping other women navigate their own devastating discoveries, building something meaningful from the ashes of my old life. The woman Henry had betrayed was gone forever. But the woman who had emerged from that betrayal was stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself than she had ever been before. I had learned that love without respect is just manipulation. That trust without honesty is just naivety. That a life built on someone else's lies is no life at all. But I had also learned that betrayal, while devastating, is not fatal. That strength can be found in the darkest moments. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you ever build. Henry had thought he was destroying me when he chose Beverly over our marriage. Instead, he had given me the push I needed to discover who I really was when I wasn't defining myself through someone else's needs and expectations. And I was still rising.